Welcome, everybody, to the Menrva Lounge, joined by Dr. Betty Murray, co-founder of Menrva, and I'm Kelly Resendez, the president of Menrva and co-founder as well. So excited to dig in a little bit. Dr. Betty talks about our body really being a symphony of hormones, and everything needs to be working together in order for you to feel just right and feel at your best. So explain a little bit more about all of the parts of this symphony and how they work together.
Yeah, so what we're going to focus on is the idea or concept that your hormone systems work together. So to give context, if we look at how medicine is treated in the United States, you go see an endocrinologist if you have diabetes. You might see an endocrinologist for the thyroid. But then if you look at your sex hormones, that's kind of a wide open scale, but most people go to their gynecologist and they're perceived and treated as if they're separate. But the reality is they are a symphony and they play together. So you wouldn't have a percussion, group working by themselves, playing by themselves. That would sound like noise. And so the way to think about it is you have two main controllers in your brain. One is the hypothalamus. So think of that as the director of the show. That's the big guy that's making the big decisions. Then the conductor is the pituitary. And the pituitary has a bunch of hormones that talk to these different systems. Right. So on one side, they talk to the ovaries. On another, they talk to the pancreas, and they talk to the adrenals. And so the important thing for people to understand is if you have a malfunction or a change in function in one of these areas, I'm going to use stress as an example because that's usually the first one that shows up. It's like your percussion. I always call the stress, hormones, cortisol, the percussion, right? If you've ever played music, the percussion section controls the speed and the bombasticness of the experience, right? So if your adrenals were once playing a waltz and you start playing scat jazz completely off, kind of all over sort of riffing, the rest of the symphony, the wind section, which might be your pancreas and insulin control, the brass section, which are your sex hormones, they don't really know what to do. So they're going to try and bring balance, homeostasis, right? So it's very easy to understand, like if I'm under a lot of stress, that's going to change my stress chemistry, my cortisol, but it's going to make the thyroid downregulate. It's going to change fertility and sexual hormones. It's going to increase insulin production so your body can respond to the stress. Now, what's really important was when you get to perimenopause, you have one big system that is all over the place, all the time. And that means all those other sides of your symphony are constantly trying to change. And where I've seen over 22 years, women struggling is number one, they're not getting treated properly. Less than 5% of women are actually getting treated for perimenopause and menopause correctly. But the other thing is well-meaning practitioners and well-meaning patients are often trying to pull this together, but they're not getting to, I feel really just right and awesome, because maybe they're getting hormones for their sex hormones, but they're not supporting the adrenals, or the thyroid hasn't really been well managed. And so, that's why I always look at it and go, okay, we got to look at the whole picture, right? Our practitioners at Menrva look at the whole picture, because you can't fix one system and expect all the rest of them to align, because they won't. And I think that gets missed even in the functional medicine community.
Yeah, no, that's great. And so when somebody's not feeling just right, like what type of blood work should they be getting in order to be able to kind of see how the symphony is performing?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it's an access and ease, right? So, at a bare minimum, it's always good to get blood work, right? And blood work, because blood work, we can see your blood sugar levels, we can see your average blood sugar, we can check insulin levels on a fasting in the morning, we can look at the entire thyroid function, right? Sex hormones, we can also look at. If you're perimenopausal, the timing of that varies depending where you are in that process. But in most cases, we would take the first day of your period, like count that as day one, and we go out about 19 to 22 days, right? Because that's when your hormones are going to be at the most volatile, and we want to see where they are relative to each other. And if we do that on a fasting in the morning, we're going to get at least a snapshot in that moment of what they are, particularly all together, right? So if all of a sudden the thyroid isn't working very well, and let's say your progesterone's low because you're in perimenopause and your cortisol's high and your blood sugar's high, you can tell that there's a lot going on, because that's a real common, that pattern is real common, right? It's higher than normal. And so when you look in blood, you can get a snapshot. There are other ways to check for hormones, like saliva, which aren't very accurate if you're menopausal and don't have hormones in at all, right? Because you're not going to have hardly any on board. And then there's urine also, but urine is less specific and less strong if you're in menopause and you don't have any hormones on board. Because the reality is you're checking how they move through your liver and how they sort of get detoxified. And if you have such low levels, most of the tests that are out there, actually, I will say all of the tests that are out there available today are not sensitive enough to pick up very small nuances in those hormones. And so it's better to wait and do those tests when you're looking after somebody has started hormone replacement therapy.
Okay, got it. And so let's talk about ranges, because there's Western medicine and functional medicine, which we practice at Menrva. Talk a little bit about the difference in ranges, because if you go to your OBGYN, they might be looking at ranges, that are common for them, but we're looking at different ones.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important for everybody to understand when we create, whether it's LabCorp Quest or, a university creating a lab, when they go to create reference range, what does reference range really mean? It means it refers to a general look at the population, right? So they take a group, a randomized group of people that have taken this test, and then they just apply math. It's a bell curve, right? The lowest end of the group was down here. The highest end was over here. They cut off the ends and they go, here's your reference range in the middle, right? So they don't go out and go, let's find the right age group and group them by, 20-year-olds, 30-year-olds, 40-year-olds, 50-year-olds. Who's the optimal? Because if you look at the American population, statistically right now, over 3/4 of us are overweight or obese, which means we're also insulin resistant, pre-diabetic. So those ranges don't really reflect optimization, and they definitely don't reflect individualization. And so when we look at it functionally, we're like, okay, that's within, like, if you're on an outlier, like if your thyroid function your TSH is way above normal, you are significantly out of balance, right? But you could be on the high end of, let's say, a TSH or a thyroid function that's not working properly. And a classically trained endocrinologist will go, oh, you're in range, which is on a TSH is a 2 to a 4.2, right? But you're nowhere close to optimized, right? And so, you have to look at them and understand that range needs to be narrower into an ideal range where somebody is not symptomatic, they have good metabolic function, they're healthy, and it's also age adjusted and healthy. And we don't do that unless you're applying functional medicine sort of lens to it.
Yeah. So tell the difference. What is the difference between functional medicine and Western and Eastern medicine?
Yeah. So first, Western medicine or conventional medicine actually isn't that old. It really started after kind of the Civil War. It really was born out of infection and surgery, right? So conventional medicine, it was really funded after the Flexner report by pharma and big industry. Right. Before that, the Flexner report came out in the late 1800s. And before that, there were homeopathic schools. There were a lot more chiropractic schools. There was a larger group of medical training. And it was kind of a unified effort through the Kellogg's organization to try and narrow down and then have influence on the development of pharma, because that's really when pharmaceuticals started hitting the market. And so conventional medicine is really born out of that. So it's very siloed, right? So you have your specialists, and it's often driven by addressing a complaint, right? Your symptom, and then addressing a drug or a treatment to it, right? Not saying that that's not bad. We need science. I think there's a huge attack going on science, which is scary, and also going to set us back decades, if not, hundreds of years. But it has its limitations, because you have to wait for a symptom that indicates a disease to then look for it, to then identify, which means you already have the disease, which means you're already behind the 8 ball. And so in most cases, you can't preventatively look at things to identify risk profile before you get there, right? Insurance and all those things decide that. So conventional medicine is very much symptom, diagnosis, treatment, right? In that order. Functional medicine is a form of medicine, but what it is it's recognizing the shared mechanics, biology, and physiology of all of these diseases. So, for instance, every disease we die from is a disease of inflammation. But if I were to go to a Western environment, my gastroenterologist is going to look at this one. My cardiologist is going to look at this one. My hepatologist who looks at my liver looks at this one, but never do any of them speak. None of them know about the other mechanism that all of those things share, right? And so the challenge is we often get medicated in these silos, and you have this sort of medication stacking where nobody's looking at all of that. So functional medicine says these have shared mechanisms. This systems biology is well understood and well known. What is combined and shared, and how can we bring this information together to get to the root cause of why something's malfunctioning or diseasing, and then do what we can to fix it, both diet, lifestyle, nutrition, exercise, supplementation, and medication. It's not an or, it's an and. And in many cases, it's a combination of all of those things, right? But we don't just give a medication to try and cover up the symptom. We're going to try and fix the underlying situation. This body's really resilient. I mean, really resilient. I'm going to be really tacky here for a moment and a little offensive probably, but we've all heard that a human can only live 3 days without water, and I'm here to tell you that's not true, right? When my mom passed away, she went 14 days without food and 11 days without water. The human body is extraordinarily resilient to try and survive. But if we don't recognize how all the different parts of our body come together, we are going to set up small little miniature bombs across our body parts that make it not work. And so we recognize that, right? And then Eastern medicine, just to clarify, Eastern medicine are conceptual medical programs or practices, Chinese medicine, Ayurvedic medicine, that started thousands of years ago, right? They may contain acupuncture, meditation, yoga, which is part of that tradition, herbs, nutrition, diet. They look at the elements of the earth, water, fire, wind, and the human body, and where those things sort of interact, and what we can tell from symptoms that say that things are out of balance. So it very much, all of these schools of thought very much understood that a body in balance is kind of like your seasons in balance, right? And when the body was out of balance, a different season would show up, right? So for instance, if you're getting a cold, it's phlegmy, it's wet, that's a spring malfunction. So Eastern medicine kind of drives these sort of conceptual ideas down into treatment. They can often be part of an integrative program, right? So somebody might use acupuncture and Chinese medicine, herbs and Chinese medicine along with conventional and or functional medicine, but they can be distinctly separate from each other.
Yeah, definitely. What about naturopaths? We see a lot of people that want to take the natural way, but they're also dealing with perimenopause and menopause. Like, what do they do that's different?
Yeah, so the Flexner report that I sort of mentioned that was pushed through by Kellogg that sort of dismantled a lot of these other medical systems, one of the big ones was naturopathy, right? So naturopathic medicine schools, there were a lot more of them back then before Flexner and all of the sort of financial interest, big pharma really was born. And so naturopathic medicine, so true naturopathic medical doctor, right? So an NMD, a naturopathic medical doctor goes through medical school training through a naturopathic school. There's several, Bastyr and Southwest Naturopathic Medical School. There's a couple in the United States that are still around. They learn traditional medicine so they can do kind of family practice things. They might do hormone replacement in small amounts. They can't do controlled, so they're not going to do testosterone. But they also learn a lot about herbs and nutrition. So they often have a good balance of herbs and nutrition. But often they are, depending on the school of thought and where they went to school and sort of how they practiced, they often may sort of poo-poo other things like hormone replacement and other stuff. It's highly variable. But naturopaths absolutely can help in this arena. They just probably need additional functional training, because a naturopath and a functional medicine trained clinician are not the same, right? They have some similarities, but not always the same. Then there's a broader scope of the word of naturopathy, naturopath, traditional naturopath, which could be anything from a couple-month course, right, that gets used in the marketplace that doesn't have any certification, licensure, or other things. traditional naturopathic medical doctors are licensed in about, I think, 13 states in the United States. They practice medicine, right? Smaller, narrower focus, but they practice. Like in Texas, they cannot practice. So if you went to Bastyr, you can't come to Texas and practice. You need to stay in California or other places. But naturopathy and this other sort of category are closer to health coaches, right? And they're unlicensed providers, and then they're a broader scope of things. So you can run into everything and anything under the sun in that arena.
Okay. And can you naturally address some of the hormone deficiencies that we see in perimenopause and menopause? Like, is that possible?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the question becomes, what is it we're trying to do? If we're trying to reduce our symptoms of stress and maybe make our sleep better, help nutritionally for our thyroid to work better, lots of those things can be addressed nutritionally. Can we take herbs like black cohosh, dong quai? Obviously, that needs to be really clean sourced, and you need to know whether you metabolize it properly to reduce symptoms of hot flashes and night sweats. Things like estravera, which is a Russian rhubarb plant that has been shown clinically to reduce hot flashes and night sweats. You can do those things. However, there is no herb, supplement, or product on the planet that can replenish ovaries that have lost their eggs. When that carton is empty, the ovaries have crapped out. And in many cases, your body, they'll shrivel up like a little walnut and get reabsorbed. Like they're done.
Yeah.
Right. Because I'll tell you, Kelly, I had a whole lot of naivete, and you've met me. I have a lot of bravado sometimes, can't help it. But when I was younger, in my 30s, I was like, I'm so going to go through menopause on my own and do nutrition because I know everything. I've taught yoga, all of this. I was very much, I'm not going to do meds. Right. I was put on thyroid and I'm like, I don't need to be on this. I tried to take myself off thyroid so many times. My hair would fall out, like all this stuff. And I was like, I obviously need it. But when you get in there and you really start to understand the chemistry, yes, you can be maybe reduced symptoms, but you're not going to improve your bone mineral density and reduce cardiovascular disease and protect your brain in the same way without the hormones. And I think that's the hardest part. Not everybody needs hormone replacement, but the all signs and all signals point to when we do hormone replacement, particularly in that perimenopause transition, we reduce our risk of all-cause mortality later on. Yeah. And you just can't do it with supplements. I'd love to. Yeah. But you can't.
Well, let's dig into the thyroid and share a little bit about what your thyroid does and how important it is in this symphony.
Yeah. So the thyroid is where everybody thinks about metabolism. So think of thyroid hormone, right? So we have a cascade of hormones that are made that the body then uses in different ways. So the first one is, most of you, if you've had hormones tested and you haven't seen a functional person, your doctor only runs a test called TSH, which is thyroid stimulating hormone. This is really important. That is not a thyroid hormone. It's the pituitary, the conductor, talking to your thyroid. Right. And if it's classically elevated, if it's above the reference range, that means your thyroid is running slow. So think of it as that hormone is a coach. So if it's whispering down the field to the thyroid, it says, cool, I see enough hormone out there. If it's screaming at the top of its lungs down the field, your thyroid is not producing enough, but it is not directly a thyroid hormone. Right. Now, your thyroid makes two hormones, T4 and T3, but the bulk of it is a hormone called T4. So that is equivalent to your body cutting up a bunch of firewood and putting it on the front porch. It's not getting burned. It's not doing anything until you pick it up and take it into the room where the fireplace is. That requires transporters. And then when your body takes that firewood into the cells, it has to pop an iodine molecule off of it. It becomes T3, right? T3 is your active thyroid hormone. And even more so important is how many are free. Because in order for it to move in the room, it has a taxi cab that drives it around. The taxi cab has to let it out, because if it can't get out of the taxi cab, it can't function. T3 is then the key that clicks into the engine of every single one of your cells and turns on the engine, right? So that makes the cell rev up and burn more calories, burn more energy, create more fuel and energy. And so when you don't have enough of that, you have everything from fatigue, brain fog, hair loss, dry skin, constipation. It's every single cell is affected. And unfortunately, many women experience problems here at the same time they're experiencing perimenopause. And so they get sort of missed in the process. And often the symptoms get dismissed because they're like, oh, your hair's falling out because you're perimenopausal. Is it? Or is it both?
Yeah. Interesting. And women are 3 times more likely to get thyroid cancer.
Yeah.
What is your opinion on that? Or what does the data say is the reason for that? I mean, 3 times is a pretty big number.
Yeah, I mean, if you look even at like thyroid disorders that are autoimmune, Hashimoto's and Graves' disease, right? That's predominantly female. It's like 90% female, 10% male. And that's true of all autoimmune conditions
Mm.
except for ankylosing spondylitis. Women are predominantly the primary players in and the people diagnosed. A lot of that is because, even if you don't get into the nuances of the thyroid, estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone, but particularly estrogen and progesterone, modulate the immune system. So they tell it to pay attention, they tell it to dial back. And when like estrogen is very, very low, the inflammatory cascade goes very high, the control on everything down to your mast cells, which are cells that control histamine and can dump that. So women get into perimenopause and they're like, I'm hidey, I'm itchy, I'm having allergies for the first time in my life. Estrogen modulates and controls that. So then when you look at cancer, we have to remember your body produces cancer cells every day, all the time. But our immune system comes along and T cells come along and go, I'm going to kill that, right? We have cells that kill it and take care of it. Well, when we have hormones that modulate and control those cells that are not functional anymore, and they're all over the place, things can get out of hand and the control mechanism of removal is no longer there, right? And I would say the other part is we are more sensitive to toxins, chemicals, heavy metals, and all these other things that are also part of that cascade, because all of those affect how our liver processes things, and our hormones make our liver process things very, very differently than men.
Yeah. And what would you say are like the things that we want to avoid then in order to be able to keep our thyroid functioning at a high level?
Yeah, I mean, it's all the things that you probably hear every day about just being healthier. You want good, clean, organic, pesticide, herbicide free, non-GMO food whenever you can get it. We can't get it 100%. Like you go to a
Yeah.
restaurant, good luck. But the reality is the more we can eat clean foods that don't have those residues and other things on them, the less burden it creates on the body. And staying away from phthalates, plasticizers, or fragrances. They did a really crazy study looking at breast cancer tissue, right? So breast cancer tumor tissue, and show that the tumor would regress when you stopped using commercial body care products that contain phthalates, parabens, like you think about what you put on your body and your face. We might be barking up the wrong tree because we're looking for these other smoking guns. We might be looking for heavy metals, which can be a problem, but it might very well be the lotion you put on your body every day.
Yeah. So like staying away from the perfumes and the lotions that are heavy and all of that is a
Yeah,
great,
toxins.
great
Yeah.
thing to do. So you touched on the immune system and how it's supposed to protect us. Most of us don't really know where it is and what it's doing and the things that we can do to really strengthen it. Can you explain a little bit more on that?
Yeah, I mean, our immune system exists everywhere, right? So every part of your body has some mechanistic immune function. So, for example, we produce antibodies, IgM and IgA antibodies in our saliva and nasal
Mm.
passages, right? And the idea is, and then like 3/4 of your immune system has different, think of it as military branches and different types of soldiers hanging out along the intestinal walls and inside the intestines, looking and investigating what's in there. Because if you think about it, breathing, eating, drinking are where something foreign comes into the body, and your digestive tract, until the very last second, is something outside the body within your body. It's keeping everything inside that tube, essentially. And so the immune system is investigating that. So a big part of our immune system is actually through the gut mechanism. And that's why we look at leaky gut and gut function. But we also have the thymus, and we have the spleen that produces antibodies. We have the lymphatic system, which is kind of the transport for all these things, and the lymph nodes. So they're everywhere, right? And, when our immune system goes awry, it's often not one particular area. It's kind of like everybody either ends up like in a full-fledged World War II, or different parts of it are Pearl Harbor, right? Like this one's
Yeah.
no longer working, so everything kind of goes sideways.
Yeah, so if somebody's getting sick a lot, that's
Mhm.
really where they want to look at like, is my gut, healthy? Am I really in a place where I'm going to be able to protect myself long term? So you've touched on a lot today. Functional medicine is what we do at Menrva. Share a little bit more on what Menrva telemedicine does to be able to address the thyroid, the hormones, the gut, all the things that we talked about today.
Yeah. So, what I found in the industry is even well meaning providers, whether they're clinicians or whether they're telemedicine companies, they were still operating on the idea that if a woman has hot flashes and night sweats and you give them hormones, particularly estrogen and probably progesterone, and those go away, that's enough, right? Because that's where the Women's Health Initiative and previous research to that kind of paid attention to, right? The clinical trials were looking at these very narrow windows and very narrow expectation of treatment, right? And so the problem is if we look at the research, the treatment isn't just to get rid of your hot flashes, it's actually to reduce risk for chronic disease and early death. And that's missing. That's missing because if you don't do labs and look at all the hormones, all of the thyroid, the adrenal function, the insulin and blood sugar, you're missing part of the picture. And then when you do start treatment, you need to know whether that treatment is not only getting rid of your hot flashes, night sweats, and the other 88 different symptoms you might have, but it's also whether you're at levels that have been found in the research to be therapeutic to protect your brain, your heart, your bones. That to me is the most valid. And so when we look at Menrva, Menrva is a treatment platform across all 50 states that uses that functional medicine lens of pre-testing treatment that's individualized to every single woman, that's proactive, predictive, and preventative, and that we're testing along the way to make sure you're at those therapeutic ranges that get rid of your symptoms, but also reduce your risk. And then even more so, we go one step further where we look at how you get rid of these hormones. This is where my PhD research was really centered, and how your body gets rid of them, because you may have other medications or other things or genetic uniqueness that may affect how your body processes this stuff. So we look a little bit further so we can give you really precise hormone treatment. And
Yeah.
that's really important.
No, that's great. Well, for anybody out there, just head over to gethormonesnow.com and we'll make sure that we do a consultation with you. So thank you, Dr. Betty, for
Thank you.
sharing so much wisdom today on this symphony that is going on within our bodies and our thyroid and really just, our immune system as well. So we look forward to seeing you guys all on the next Menrva Lounge. If you found this information helpful, make sure that you share it with your friends. Join us every Monday at 11 o'clock Pacific, 2 o'clock Eastern, and we'll see you on the next Menrva Lounge.